Jackson Carlaw, 5 minutes or so, please.
Presiding officer, I've actually found this a particularly difficult debate to prepare for, and so much so I've come with nothing to say. I thought I would listen carefully to the arguments that were. I would listen carefully. Nothing prepared to say. I would listen carefully to the arguments that were being presented and then comment. And I want to deal with it in two ways: the issue at hand in the petition, and the way, in fact, I think that the Lord President responded to the issues raised in the petition. Now, with regard to the petition itself, I always thought it was a rather curious petition, based as it was on something that might be going to happen in New Zealand, and I was never altogether entirely impressed with it, but I thought that since the issue had been raised, it was perfectly appropriate for the Petitions Committee to seek to find out what the response of the Scottish Government and the Lord President would be. Amongst my parliamentary colleagues, I should say, without naming anyone, that I've been told quite clearly that we don't want any of that. But let me say, I think that the Minister identified quite ably why, in fact, we should have confidence in the current process, and why I'm not persuaded that we do actually need a register of interest. There is the Judicial Oath, there is the Statement of Principle and Judicial Ethics, there is the Judiciary and Courts Scotland Act of 2008. And either we take the view that we are appointing and have confidence in the judges that we appoint, or we do not. And I believe that we should. And I think that Graham Pearson hit on the point that what we don't want is to find the whole process of law within the court system being delayed because issues are being raised as to whether or not the judge has an interest which might be regarded as being one which means they ought to be recusing themselves from the trial, and the whole thing becomes bogged down. So I'm not persuaded of the issue, but I have to say I thought that the whole way that the petition then developed was less than satisfactory. Now, we did hear from Moyala, and I want just to quote what she said. She said that she didn't know why there wasn't a register, but it has long been the case in this country that particular groups are harder to challenge. In the past, one such group was the medical profession. I had a look at the website of the General Medical Council, the regulator of doctors, and although I think that it would have resisted this strongly in the past, it now publishes registers of interests, records, family relationships of its council members and so on. At one time, it was difficult for politicians to take on that group. It is perhaps difficult to take on the judiciary because judicial independence is always mentioned. As I said, that is a cornerstone of democracy. But because there has been no separation of accountability and independence, it is easy for the judiciary to say, we are independent, so don't interfere with that. Unless independence and accountability are separated, legislation will continue to include no requirement for more openness and transparency. Now, I thought that was quite a powerful argument. And I have to say that the response of the Lord President was essentially to say, get your tanks off my lawn. And it was all very well to send a written response in. But I thought that if we were going to explore the issues the petitioner raised effectively, and in fact to give weight to the arguments that the Lord President was making, the best way to do that would be for him to have his argument tested with the involvement of the committee. Now, I have to say, in briefing I've heard from the Law Society of Scotland, they don't think the Petitions Committee of this Parliament is a grand enough committee for the Lord President to have to command his attention. If it was a subject committee like the Justice Committee, fair enough, but all manner of petitions could come forward and the Lord President would have to present himself. Well, that's not the way in which the Petitions Committee conducts itself at all. We thought there was a serious argument here that ought to be examined. And in the language, as you know, that I employed, devoid of any colour, I did myself say that it gave the impression that the Lord President was part of an Edwardian establishment disdain for the right of the hoi polloi, as he sees it, to have any understanding of such matters, and that there was a swish of judicial ermine and velvet that should cow into deference the public and the legislator in relation to our right to understand the issues. And that was what I think many on the committee of my colleagues, they will speak for themselves, found slightly unsettling and unacceptable. Now, if we are going to ensure that when petitions are raised, as Graham Pearson said, raising a perception of a problem, where in fact, as the Minister has articulated, there is a very cogent argument which would suggest that there is no need for further action, I think the best way is not to suggest private meetings off the record with members of the committee to explore issues within a limited mandate and framework, but that the appropriate way to have done it would have been for the Lord President to come and, in a responsible environment, place his case on the record, allow us to have tested it, and then, I think, quite in all likelihood, have agreed with the principle that he had articulated, and thereby have advocated why we thought that was the right approach. We weren't able to do that, and that's why we're having the debate today. I think it illustrated that you cannot simply, in the modern age, say we are part of something that is independent, we are not accountable to the Parliament for these matters, and therefore there is no need for us to make a public defence of our argument. I don't have a problem with the position, I have a big problem with the way that we have got to the point we're at today.